Because they identify with them.
Exactly.
That part of it.
Stupid
How do I go back?
Stupid goes.
I don't think they can identify with his billions of dollars, but his brain power, they might be able to identify.
You are right.
All right, so this is more of me. You see what the header says or the subject, practicing ideas. I didn't run spell check on here, so forgive me. But that's literally what it means. It's something that I'm not advocating at all. It's more of, well, I believe that building software or software development is a practice. And I sincerely believe that the more I demonstrate how quickly I can build software with it still maintaining quality, then the more I'm worth, And as a result, I read a lot, I practice, I imagine, and I practice that. And so by no means am I advocating what I'm going to discuss for you guys to immediately, pull some of these libraries that I've built off of NuGet or, download some of the extensions that I've created from the Visual Studio Gallery, but more just consider it, roast me if it's just a horrible idea, or say, you know what, yeah, but why don't you enhance it by considering this? And that's the whole point of me being up here. So I'm looking for feedback. I'll share some disclaimers about what I've discovered as I attempted to practice, some of these different methods. So my name is Scott Nimrod. I created a business. I've attracted a couple of clients. It's called Bizmonger. And that's pretty much it with that. Who am I? Well, I'm an application developer. I've also worked as an SDET, or Software Development Engineering Test, which is a popular term used at Microsoft. And I'm a struggling entrepreneur. You can look up my publishing name, Bizmonger, in the Windows Store and also Google Play. And you'll probably see a dozen apps in the Windows Store. You'll see 2 or 3 apps in Google Play since I've started building Xamarin.Forms applications literally like 5 weeks ago. So in regards to development, I'm in love with C# and XAML. I mean, that's my thing, right? And so I usually focus when I'm hired to focus on Windows desktop applications. I'm also very comfortable doing Windows Mobile, specifically, back then it was Windows 8, Windows Phone 8, and I still enjoy it. And thankfully, one of my mentors got me hip to Xamarin.Forms. He said, "Hey, Scott, you don't have to be obsolete. If you love XAML C# with the emphasis on XAML, you really should check out Xamarin.Forms. It's matured a lot since the last 12 months." And so I took him on his offer, and I'm really impressed. They probably know, they know my name right now in the Xamarin.Forms because of all the questions I asked. So that's a brief background about me. And say a little bit more, I've worked in Seattle, Tampa, Manila, Philippines. My online footprint, you can find my technical blog is bizmonger.wordpress.com. You can see me on LinkedIn, Stack Overflow. I dropped off a couple deposits on GitHub. I've built several libraries on NuGet, and also I've built some Visual Studio extensions. Right? So you either look up my name, Scott Nimrod, or look up my alias Bizmonger, and you'll see my contributions to the industry. Now, what I'm here to discuss are 3 things that I'm not convinced that it's the best way to build software, but I am convinced that it's another option within your arsenal. Specifically, this is rethinking architecture. I consider myself a disciple of what's his name? Robert Martin. I said that name right? And he has several videos and also a blog on something called clean architecture. And so his argument is when we look at most of our applications, actually I could pull one up too. When we look at most of our applications, can we tell by looking at Solution Explorer what is the intent of that application? What can we literally look at Solution Explorer and understand what the application does? And I know, speaking for myself, and I'll show you an example of, actually it's in my slide too, so I don't have to load up Visual Studio right now. That the answer is, for me, and some of the code that I've seen is, no, you have to dig through it to understand what the purpose of this application is. And so with clean architecture, it's an approach for, one can argue, to be able to pull up an application's source code, examine Solution Explorer as we speak from the perspective of Visual Studio, and be able to identify immediately what the application does, what it supports, etc. We're going to talk about partition view models, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean just view models. When I say partition, I literally mean segregating the responsibilities of a class. A class doesn't have to be one file. We see when we do XAML, we have a code behind file, right? It's still one class. It's a partial class. Well, consider a view model. What I'm going to discuss about a view model is, and I wrote up an article about it, is a view model doesn't necessarily follow the single responsibility principle. It doesn't, right? A view model reflects state, it has behavior, and it has some pre-processing before it sends that request out to your model. And so I'm going to discuss how we can pull out or segregate the responsibilities of a view model, and also any class, such as a repository as well. And also I'm going to talk about messaging. And, well, messaging is, I view messaging as, well, kind of like events, except within .NET, their notion of events is literally the client knows its server, right? So the client will say, var, my server dot some event of my server plus equals, and then you could do a lambda or you could do a method, but it knows it knows who its server is, which means that there's tight coupling, which may be fine in certain situations, but it could also be more maintainable if a client has no clue who's going to handle its request. Just spins a message up in the air, and if it's interested in a response, it subscribes to it. Else, it doesn't matter. So that's I'm going to talk about that, and that's one alternative to be able to better maintain software. So when we talk about architecture, and I looked this up in the dictionary, architecture is more focused on structures, buildings, right, facilities. And I'm not convinced that architecture is the right term that we use for software. So I'm not convinced that structures, buildings, what is it in Spanish, edificios or something, that they don't really have behavior. They have allocations where certain things take place, such as kitchen, living room, bathroom, etc. And those can house functions, but they don't do anything. I just like design, right? Design, instead of architecture, expresses intent. So what we're looking at is, can anybody guess? What does that look like? The Batmobile, right? I think I was like 7 or 8 when I saw the first movie. But that's the Batmobile. And we see the design of it. We may not be able to actually read it, right? But this right here, that says front brake air intake vents. We see the functional areas of it. We see the intent of the components that make up this Batmobile. we see a machine gun casing replacement access. We look up here, we see canopy open position, slide canopy for access. Up here, blast-proof windshield. That's design, right? We're looking at the different components of what we call a Batmobile, and we see the intent of what those components are for. Can we say the same thing about our Solution Explorer? Can we look at our Solution Explorer and see the intent of what that application is supposed to do, like we see with this Batmobile? I wrote an application in 2012. I was in Seattle, then I was in the Philippines, and a couple hours before I would work my 9 to 5, and a couple hours after I would work my 9 to 5, I was hell-bent on being one of the few Windows 8 developers, right? So I was building this on a virtual machine before Windows 8 even came out officially. And I wrote this application called Quote Builder. And it's an application that manages business documents, such as business proposals. You could convert that to invoices, etc. Well, if you look at the Solution Explorer of this application, can you tell what it really does? I know I told you what it does when I literally like 30 seconds ago. But when you look at the Solution Explorer, how easy would it be for you to jump in there and immediately modify the area where a business quote is generated? Or modify some code. Maybe there's a bug fix and we need to update when someone creates a profile. Looking at that Solution Explorer, how confident are you that you know exactly where to go?
Quote Wizard?
What's that?
Quote Wizard?
It's called Quote Builder.
Yeah, but there's a file, an XML file called Quote Wizard.
Oh, does that come with Visual Studio?
I'm
I'm not familiar with Quote Wizard.
No,
Pure
saying,
file.
right there.
Oh, shoot. Okay. No. Oh, sorry. But the point that I'm trying to stress is it's not, I wrote this, right? And this is part of a learning exercise. And it is what it is. I'm proud of the fact that I took the opportunity to write something that right now I see massive opportunities for improvement. The intent of Solution Explorer, I would say, is to find, navigate, and learn. You know, you search for a specific, I won't even say file. You search for some code that's responsible for something. Okay, we navigate to it, and we can also look at Solution Explorer supposedly to learn what application does or is responsible for. But you really can't tell that from this right here. Now, let's consider what I would call user story modules. The definition of a user story from Wikipedia is a description consisting of one or more sentences, everyday or business language, that captures what a user does or needs to do. With that said, with that definition of a user story, and us talking about a Solution Explorer, how can we revisit Solution Explorer and be able to look at it and identify architecture or the design or the intent of an application through a Solution Explorer? Now remember, the Solution Explorer looked like that 3 years ago. I ported it over from Windows 8 to Xamarin.Forms. All right. Now, our Solution Explorer looks like this. Well, this is a piece of it. We have modules, or in the case of Visual Studio, we have specific projects, aka DLLs, that show what the application does. We can create a quote. We can search for customers. can view a quote, add a material, edit material, etc. Add a service, edit the service, manage services. Now you guys are free to ask questions and say, oh, that doesn't make sense. What if this? What if that? You know, etc. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that I realized that well, yeah, I realized it, but there may be some other things that you guys immediately say, well, hold up, and I would love to learn about that, right? I'm going to talk about some performance issues with using this type of technique.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
If I understood what you just explained, each one of those stories is a separate DLL, correct?
Yes.
So where do you put the functionality that may be common?
I created another folder with potentially an n number of DLLs, and I'll call that folder core or infrastructure or whatever you want to call it. This is literally a section of Solution Explorer. I can show you actually I'll show you right now. The full Solution Explorer looks like, how do I get off PowerPoint and show my desktop? Do I hit escape? That's not working.
Window D.
Window D. Okay. And how do I do this? Any other ideas? Because
You had it for a second.
Alt tab. I mean, I'm looking at it on my screen, but it's not. Is there something I can do on this one?
F5? F5?
F5 was. Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to show you later. Hold up. There's some things over here. Hold up for 1 second.
Windows 8 or 10?
This is Windows 10.
So I think 10 window P will give you different display options. Duplicate your display.
Can I do high presenter view?
Presentation mode within PowerPoint. That it thinks it's doing a presentation. It doesn't want. That's why he's seeing something different than what's on the screen.
So we'll just gather around you.
It has to be a simple way to do it, but I guess I'll get back to it later. So going back, but my answer to your question is that was just a snapshot of that particular section, and then I have I have a folder called core, or you could call it infrastructure or whatever, and that has reusable code that those user stories can rely on. And with that said, okay, how do I? Now I'm trying to get this to point to what I'm looking at.
Window P.
Window P. I see extend, second screen.
Duplicate your screen and you can see what you see.
Well, now my screen is black. What does that say over there?
Extend.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it. I'll be happy if I could get back to my slideshow.
I think you were close. Windows P and then duplicate.
PC screen only. And duplicate. Okay. And let's see if it's smart enough to. Okay. So to answer your question, these are the packages that I have, or just folders, right? We see the user stories right here. And I have a folder called core, in which I segregate different responsibilities for just the core logic that's required that my user stories depend on. So for example, calculate transaction, something called documents, entities, transaction. I have a folder called native that I added to core. And this is my Droid project within here. There's a third party, which is a DLL that I created for messaging. So that's what my Solution Explorer looks like. That's when everything is collapsed. Wait.
I have a question.
Okay. What's that?
I have a question on the previous slide.
Okay.
So here you have multiple, you have protocol class libraries for each, so for like specific functionality. What about like having like a customer's portable class library, and then instead of having these as separate projects, you would have them potentially separate classes, right, with all the functionality within the class. Just wondering if you really need the level of having different projects for specific functionality.
All right. So with that question, the answer is no. I don't think so. What I learned is within Visual Studio, I can't speak for other IDEs. As of 2015, the more projects that you have, the longer it takes to load up Visual Studio with that solution. The longer it takes to build your solution, the longer it takes to run your unit tests. And so there's some workarounds for that, and it's the idea that you already expressed, is to consolidate these projects that are still focused on customer package, consolidate that into one project or one DLL. Another alternative, I believe, is to create different solutions per responsibility, such as create a solution for like materials or create a solution for services. And ultimately, instead of loading a project, you just have a DLL. I haven't practiced that, but I think that would make sense. So, yeah. I'm not sure if that would be the best approach for a really, really big project in which customers, there's so many views within the application that are dedicated to managing a customer. I'm not sure, but it's definitely more performant. And I don't know, when I think about, I don't know. It's I think I would go with your approach since I went through this exercise, as long as it's still clear to me and it's easy for me to navigate.
So I have another question in that way. Like for example, those DLLs that you have, create code, search customers, view code. Do you think that those would be, any chance that those would be used in a different solution? That you would create a different solution that would have that functionality? Or is that just so specific to this particular solution that there's no chance that be used anywhere else?
So I've considered that if we're talking about the same thing. The biggest issue that I've identified with doing it this way is it's just performance. That's what I identified off rip. What I like about this particular setup is we have what Microsoft right now, they're trying to market universal app platform or whatever it's called. And so the business logic on the client is still there, right? It could be used in another solution, and it could be used for a Windows 10 app or a Universal app, etc. Unfortunately, let's go to what you said. We could pull up any of these, right? We can, if we go to customers, we could say view quote. Unfortunately, each of these user story projects, they all have a XAML file inside of it, which, you know, if I wanted to, I could extract out that XAML file and throw that inside of another project, and now I have this bigger proliferation of projects. But I would be able to reuse, and I still could, I just don't have to reference that XAML view, right? I could still use that project for other devices or for other platforms for a Windows 10 application. This is a Xamarin.Forms application. So the answer is yes. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
I was just going with his train of thought.
Okay.
Just to, does it, you know, what's the true value of having all these separate URLs? You came from it, aside from, I mean, you're segregating your functionality in a way that's visually very clear.
Okay. So, good question, and this is why I'm putting these ideas out there, is my argument is if I'm not the only one working on this project, and there's a team of other people, and there's some juniors, etc., how maintainable is this solution? How easy is it for someone to immediately identify the piece of code that they need to modify, and they're just effective sooner versus them having to contact other people. Those people have to switch contexts and figure out, you know, they have to stop what they're doing, help out that person, because the Solution Explorer doesn't express the intent of the application. Someone has to go asking around. So my argument is this may be a stupid solution. It may be a dumb technique. But I'm putting it out there because I think that people will be able to better navigate the solution in order to do what they need to do without having to tap someone else on the shoulder and borrow that engineering time from someone else.
One of the challenges of this approach, though, is like if you just want to look at information that's related to like the quote section you have open there, because the files are spread across all these different source code projects, and I can't even, like, for example, go just to one individual folder and see all the classes that particularly relate to a quote, right? Because you've got those classes now spread out between 3, 4, maybe 5 different projects.
Yeah.
So it's easier to kind of, I think, figure out maybe what I'm looking for. I'm trying to go and find one specific issue, and it's a problem in searching for quotes, for example. I think I can find that easier based on your approach. I think you're right. But if I'm just troubleshooting quotes in general, or there's a problem that affects all quotes, now I have the inverse problem of things are actually more spread out. It's a different problem now, because by spreading things out like this, it's more granular, which has the side effect of now if I have to look in multiple different places to go find something, in one sense, I'm actually adding complexity and adding difficulty in trying to see things in the Solution Explorer rather than just having everything in one folder where I can see it.
All right, so let's try to do an example. If I go to the slide, looking at these different user stories and considering view models or whatever, what would we want to attempt to modify? Like if we wanted to say, hey, we need to add a new property to the view model that's responsible for editing material. Would it be more challenging to find that code immediately?
I'm gonna say the edit material. I'm going out on a limb here.
I would think so too. My thought process is right now. Okay, my thought process is this. And it may be kind of extreme, right? Should the single responsibility principle only be applied towards the scope of a method or a class? Is that only what it should be applied to? Should an application be focused? Should a DLL be focused? My argument is this. We keep things together that belong together, and we pull things apart that change for different reasons. And I think that isn't just at the method level or at the class level. I think that the single responsibility principle can, and I think should, be applied to all components of software development. But that's just my thought. I'm not sure.
I think an application is a sum of its parts. That by definition, an application isn't a single responsibility. The application, the single responsibility is to do the work that's supposed to be done, using the different components that you put together from your classes or whatnot. But to think of an application as a single responsibility is just carrying it way too far.
Okay. So with that said, if we go back to, let me bring up, well, actually it's on my PowerPoint slide, right? No, I'm gonna bring up the whole, I'm gonna go to the PowerPoint slide. If we go to, if we go back to this slide right here, which one would you feel more comfortable with basically doing maintenance on? Now, to me, the Solution Explorer, I see a view models folder, right? And then I see all these other, under view models, I see inventory, register, services, user, etc. I can dig into it and I'll find it. But for me, I look at it and I know that I'm going to be spending most of my time trying to find specific files that just, yes.
And I apologize if this was covered when I was away a moment ago, but with the last slide that you were showing, it seems like you're suggesting to have like separate projects for things like edit material, add material that you can look at and know what they do. But wouldn't you be able to parallel that with folders of the same name within a same project?
I think so.
So then what would be the benefit for making it, like if the purpose is to look at the Visual Studio Explorer to see projects named edit materials versus a folder named edit materials, what would be the benefit to making it a separate project versus having all that related code just in the folder?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's a good question, right? I think for me, I think I could put anything inside of a folder, well, just like I could put anything inside of a project. But I feel like when I'm looking at a project, I feel like that project is really responsible for something, right? And just as a human being, I kind of view the two differently. In a folder, I could just dump anything in there that may not have anything to do with, editing a user profile. But you know what? That user profile makes a call to this or something. And I just feel like for me, I feel like using a folder to describe the intent is fine initially, but I feel like over time, that folder is no longer going to express its contents as the code matures. But that's just my thought, and I've seen it in my code, and I've seen it in other pieces of code. and people have to be aware that, hey, this probably should be pulled out into that directory or something like that. But yeah, so that's why I'm putting this out here. Is it worth the overhead? Is this over? What's the word I'm looking for?
Diminishing returns?
Yeah. I know for performance it is, right?
I mean, you should take even when you have even one level or extreme. I mean, should every single function point have its own solution? It's not really any different than where you're going. All it's doing is, I think, scattering things that are related farther and farther apart, which actually is going to make them, I think, overall more difficult to debug and tie together.
This is over.
Yeah, I think it's just going just a little too far.
It's like with database. I mean, sometimes you have to denormalize a database.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have apps right now I'm working on where some stuff is denormalized a bit to simplify the querying and improve performance. Absolutely. We have, I mean, there's no real rules in software. We have a lot of guidelines.
Well,
Recommendations and things that we know are generally right, but there's almost always an exception or two. But everything that we know is right.
I forget who. Oh yeah. Well, okay. Oh, sorry. I understand that.
Yeah.
But you know what? Over time, like things just degrade over time, and maybe this will too.
Well, that's
right?
why it's important to just take time.
People don't stay on top. They don't keep like everything pristine. And
no, they don't.
And
but
this
a good tech lead on a project should be helping with that, right? That's one of their roles is to look at what's happening on the team and what's happening as the code base evolves and take a step back. Like for example, whenever I'm working on a project, and if for every month's worth of work I do, I'll go ahead and allocate at least a day or two just to go back and do some refactoring and reorganization. Because face it, all of our requirements change all the time while the projects are active and while they're in development. None of us ever know 100% of the requirements before we start. I mean, I'm lucky on most projects if I know 30% of the requirements. I have some that I'm working on. I think I do about, in retrospect, about 10 to 15% of the requirements when I started. So, of course, my initial design approach was completely wrong. I mean, it wasn't my fault or any problem with the software design principles. It's just that things change and things move. So I've just learned that because I expect things to move, I have to plan for things to move. And so I just will periodically go back and, like you mentioned, like maybe a folder all of a sudden now has things that don't belong there. I'm okay with a folder containing some things that don't belong there for a little while, but then when I do my end of month cleanup, if you will, I'll take a little bit of time, then I'll go back and I'll say, where does this really go? And should this be split up? And does this need to be modularized in a different way? I'll do my refactoring and I go on my merry way.
So it seems like
I'm taking a very iterative approach to it. Expecting that it won't be perfect today and it never will be perfect. Just always try to make it a little bit better.
Okay. Do you use CodeMap?
No.
Are you familiar with CodeMap?
No.
Okay. Is anybody familiar with CodeMap? Right. Okay. CodeMap is well, I think it's a feature on Ultimate, or I think now it's called Enterprise, right, for Visual Studio. And it gives you a visual representation with pretty diagrams of various classes within there. So I like CodeMap, and
For the record, I'm using Xamarin Studio.
Okay. Oh, where's my cursor at?
So it seems like there's a
Oh, okay, there we go.
there's a wide range that kind of like I think that's a good point because this reminded me of a discussion on denormalizing databases, where everybody's got an opinion of like what their comfort level is, which could be from having separate folders or even below all to having separate projects. And I'm sure like we all have some comfort levels somewhere between the two. Like you could take some, like even if you have them in folders, you might break out some code to put it into a separate project. So I guess the concept is really like more of a matter of preference, like to accomplish it by making things pretty readable, like in terms of how they're named, but like what your comfort level is within that, what you would make a project or just a folder or some maybe folders within 2 or 3 projects.
Yeah. So when I'm reviewing my code, right, I review it by writing unit tests, right? When my unit tests break, I'm forced to Well, let's see what the testing period. I'm forced to prove how code works. I've also really appreciated code now. Right? So this is one view. This is one perspective of when you use CodeMap, you're able to identify the parts that make up your application. We see the folders here as containers, and they wrap around various DLLs. We see in our stories, we have services in which we edit, add, whatever CRUD operations for service. And same thing with customers, right? Almost. Materials, profile. We see our system and we can identify using CodeMap what our classes are touching. So we can make a decision on what they shouldn't be touching. When using CodeMap, based on the design that I broke down, in which there's a project per responsibility or per user story, really. When we look at this add service, we see its dependencies. We see that it depends on entities DLL, and that it depends on this patterns down here, this Bizmonger patterns DLL that contains our messaging. We see exactly what that project should be touching. And if we see something that is touching that, why would it be doing that? It's kind of easier for me to identify, right? We could break it down even further using CodeMap like this. But to what you said, I'm not advocating this. I'm just saying, hey, this is an idea that I experimented with, and I kind of like it because I think it helps me segregate responsibilities even further. And I'm not going to know everything, especially when other people are touching the system. As much as I try to house clean or housekeep, whatever, I'm just not going to know everything. And so for me, I think this is, it could change, my mind could change like literally a couple months from now, but I think that this kind of enforces me to be more rigid in regards to how I'm allocating responsibilities within the different projects of my application. But it may not work for the majority of people. And this is a really small project, so when it becomes really big, performance-wise, certain things have to be done.
What I see here is this, the conference touch more like a philosophical problem.
Okay.
Because, for example, when he spoke, he mentioned, I touched that between you, in your word that, well, there are a team lead, there are somebody that has to say and has to clean and has to prepare and has to guarantee what this has to be done in terms not only of creation, also for maintenance, which I think that is one of his main concern. The fact that everybody knows maintain a system that has been there for 10 years, that you cannot get rid of this, you was hired to do something good with a team lead that maybe was very good, but already left. And then in this moment, you need to have like a philosophy of development mantra, and say, let's try to organize to make this in a way that could be understandable. And I cannot lost looking for detail because the mare magnum is so big. So it's more than an approach, because he started a project. 3 years later, the cousin of the owner take your position, and he just be there. I know that. And then the system, but the system bring money, and the system is important, and the system cannot be stopped. Then somebody said, no, we are going to refactory, which is not true at the very refactory is an elegant way saying to put patch. But anyway, what I find interesting for me is that it's true that we all whenever we start a project or we just come with a project that already exists, we need to have some kind of knowledge, of kind of idea to organize in some way. And this is a way. And to have a lot of argument, but it's a way that promote that. And I think that because of that, it's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, I think it's the first step.
Yes.
You know, it may not be it, but I think it's something worth considering so that better ideas can spawn.
So now I want my chocolate.
Oh, I offered you something earlier. Like, no, I need a pizza. Well, thank you, though. These projects right now are set up. We're like 90% of them. Each project is just a single view model and view, right? And partial classes. Right.
So do you think that if you had not been using CodeMap, you have arrived at that particular design?
No, I started doing it before I used CodeMap, and then I personally think CodeMap complemented this particular experiment. When I say complemented, I was able to bring up CodeMap and look at my folders or packages, look at its dependencies, and then examine the classes per package, look at their dependencies, and identify like, hold up, why is editing customer, why does this depend on this project over here? I don't understand. And that visual helped me out a lot because I'm completely focused on a specific function, a specific workflow, really. And I think it kind of worked out when using CodeMap, where I can see for each user story what dependencies it should really have and what it should not be talking to. The disclaimer that I have that for using this method that I observed is, again, performance. And this was a small, project. And I mean, just loading took like 30 seconds, right? It was worse. I had a project for each user story. I had a complementary unit test project for it, right? So if there was a edit customer, I had an edit customer test project. And so I got up to like maybe 48 projects in my solution, and it was taking way too long to build. So I consolidated all my test projects into just one project. Actually, two projects, one for the actual user stories and other projects that focused on core functionality.
So for your add, you have like an add and edit materials, I think it was. So you have duplicate classes, then one for add material and one for edit material, with similar properties?
Yeah, it gets rendered different ways.
Right.
They have two different renderings.
A material is a class, right? And it has properties. So, but does that mean that you have a class with all the properties for add material and a class with duplicate properties for edit materials?
Yeah.
Why don't you just inherit from a materials property?
All right. So, for example, we're talking about materials, and we have a view model here. Oh, hold up. We have a view model here for adding material, and another one for editing. And more than likely, they have the same properties, right? And so I could have done inheritance. The views are still different, though, even though the actual properties are pretty much the same. Well, it's something that could be cleaned up, but yeah.
But wouldn't that mean you have duplicate code?
Yeah.
So that
could be consolidated.
Right. Like I know, like in Partition, that's always been like really frowned upon. Like when you have code in both places, you run the risk that you've got to change in both places. You want to add a property, you're doing it in two places versus like a single class. So that's one example. I can think of other examples where you might have like a content view control to display, material. That you might be part of editing, it might be part of adding. And other scenarios where you have common code. So like, how would you, without duplicating them, like how do you share them in this breakdown? Like if you wanted to have some part of this that works across both, the add and the edit, which I could see happening.
Then I would, the thought process is to consolidate it. So when I was going through this, I was thinking about, I couldn't help but think about the buzzword of microservices. I'm not sure if people here are familiar with microservices, but it's very granular, kind of like this solution right here. And when we identify things that could be things that have growth opportunities, right, or can be made better, then we identify it and we make it better. So in this case, I'm not saying that I'm not saying it's okay to have duplication of the same view model. Yeah, when there's an additional property that gets added to reflect state, I don't want to have to maintain it, in two different areas. I'm completely on board with that. And so when we see things that just doesn't make sense, we're just repeating ourselves, right? Dry principle. Then I'm all for saying, you know what? These are so close to each other that let's just bring it into one project, one DLL. I'm okay with that. The way that I work is I look at everything as a completely separate role, and then I kind of work iteratively, right? And so when I see commonality, then I streamline it in. But I don't do everything just on one pass. So, any other questions? Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so in regards to performance, I already talked about it. I discussed some workarounds that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's many more. This is code map, right, for one of the view models and everything that it touches. Partition view model. I think that's a fancy name that I gave it. All it is leveraging partial classes to separate segments of code within a class, whether that class is a view model or some other class, right? So with a view model, they have state, they have commands, and they have internal behavior that gets executed before that request goes out into a model. And so that view model can be pretty bloated, where the code becomes obscure because there's several responsibilities that one file is trying to manage. And so I experimented with, well, what if you can take a view model and just separate it into different files focused on different responsibilities. So in this case, there's a Visual Studio extension that you can download that will enable you to nest files, nest classes. So when you look at a XAML file and you expand that XAML file and you see the code behind file under it, with this Visual Studio extension, you can do that for any class or any file, really. So here, the root node or the root file, I just have showing the state or the properties for the view model. And then I create another class, right? Or I create another partial class, and I just provide code that's related to commands, right? So in this case, for editing a service, I have an update command, cancel, and view materials. Then I have a method that's associated to those commands for basically instantiating the command object. All right. Then I add another partial class to handle the private or protected data of that class. And that's pretty much it. So all the public methods and properties, I put in one partial class. All the private or protected, I put in another one. All the commands, I put in another one. And to me, it's easier to look at the code. Any questions? Yay, nay? Okay. There's also messaging. So if we're done with talking about splitting out a view model into different responsibilities, I use messaging a lot. And so how many of us are familiar with like, I think within Xamarin.Forms, they call it messaging center. Within Prism, we call it event aggregator. 1, 2, the majority of people use just delegates or .NET events. Okay.
I use a messaging tool called Tiny Messenger. It sounds kind of similar to publish-subscriber model.
Okay.
There's a bunch of other solutions out there too. The Tiny Messenger is small, it's a single file, which is Xamarin, so I use that project.
Okay. So with messaging, unlike .NET, where you have a delegate, and then you have an event that's I would say mapped or based on that delegate, your client object is tightly coupled to its server. So in order for you to subscribe to an event as a client, you need to know who your server is. And that might be okay, but sometimes it may not be as maintainable based on what you need to solve. So with a message bus, we create a class whose sole responsibility is to be nothing but a platform for people to place their subscriptions on. And when a publisher wants to broadcast a message, that message gets broadcasted to the subscribers without the subscriber knowing the publisher and vice versa. So your publisher doesn't have a clue who its observers are, and your observers don't have a clue who the publisher is. All they know about is this mediator or this message bus. And so that could make maintaining code easier over time because you have less dependencies, potentially, right? And so over here, again, some examples of within Prism, which is a WPF framework, they have an event aggregator class that manages this. And then for Xamarin.Forms, Messaging Center. When implementing messages, I kind of noticed that the code was, for me, kind of cryptic or hard to read because when I'm implementing it, there's a certain order, right? I have to first subscribe to a response of a message that I didn't even identify yet, and then I have to publish a message saying, "Hey, I'm interested in this." And when my publish occurs, it hits my action, right, or the code that I subscribe to in order to execute that logic. That's before my publish. So to show that, within this method right here, here's an example of using a message bus. This is using Visual Studio, the latest Visual Studio. So there's some features in here where you don't have to specify the class. If within your using statement you say using static and you point to the class that you want to leverage, you can go ahead and call the method of that class without literally writing that static class in your code. But in here, we do a subscribe to this message bus class up here, right? And we specify the message that we're interested in, and this is nothing but a string, right? If I go to the definition of it, these are all string values. And a message is, the way I would define it, or even an event, is something happened. That's it. It's up to whoever's interested in it to interpret what that something means. So in this case, and I believe that's how Microsoft Foundation classes works. The framework from back in the day is they had like this message loop that would just keep firing off whenever there would be UI events or anything like that. So within the solution, almost all my view models, they have these methods called make promises and break promises. Make promises is nothing but code that's responsible for subscribing to events or messages, and that's it. And the reason why we have break promises is to handle when that class, in this case a view model, should no longer be interested in any subsequent events, right? And so we kind of release our subscription. And so when within our constructor of this view model, it's typical for me to say, make promises, in which I say, hey, I'm going to register for these subscriptions. When these events or messages get published, I promise I'm going to respond to these events, or I'm going to respond to these messages. And then also I activate commands, which I showed earlier. And that's pretty much it. It's nothing but a subscription model that for me is an alternative for your .NET events, in which, again, I don't have to know who my server is. All I'm interested in is, I need this to be done. Here's my request. I throw it up in the air, and some anonymous object snatches it. I don't care. It's more of programming for autonomy instead of orchestration, in which I would say orchestration is, you know all the details, you know all the participants, and you're going to tell them the order in which they're going to complete an operation. Where autonomy is, it's kind of like cells. They just react, and that's what their focus is. There is no, within design patterns, a director or a builder or an orchestrator. They work independently, and when a message gets spun up, if they have a subscription to that message, they pull it, and if they want to put down a response, they publish a response. And if your client registered for a response for that message that he put out there, he or she put out there, then in this case it's an object, then they get that response. And so that's just a method for managing events. That's an alternative for the way .NET does it out the box.
How are you passing along your
Payload?
Your payload, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Are you doing more of a sort of event art style, or are you doing
no, even though
to pull back each time, kind of like a microservice like you mentioned earlier, just pass an ID and have service through autonomy?
My payload, .NET, how do I say this? .NET, what's the right word I'm looking for? They consider it a good practice to, when you're dealing with events, that you provide your source or your sender, and then you provide your arguments. All right. In this case, I don't do that. What I provide is very similar to a command. When someone hits a button or performs some type of operation on the view, a command pretty much goes to the view model, right? And the payload is just an object type. So within my subscription, what's the, I'm on the message bus. To show you, I just have a arbitrary object that you put on there as a payload, and it's up to whoever receives that object to cast it, right, to whatever object it needs to be. Okay.
So you're leveraging some sort of common, there is some sort of common library between the two, right? To store your message types.
Here's an example right here. I say, hey, I'm going to subscribe to this request file reader. The second argument is an action object that's in .NET. And the parameter for that action object is just an object. And then you can take that object and cast it to whatever you want, whether it's a primitive type or some more complex object.
Is there a way to use strong typing?
Is there a way to use strong typing? When you say strong typing,
you're dealing with a plain object, right? So then you have to, for you to use it, you have to cast it to whatever it is that it's in the object. It's an integer, it's some other class. So if you know beforehand what it is that you're going to store there, then you can.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure the best way of doing that. What I didn't like is Prism's method of doing that, in which you literally create a class to represent your event or your message. And I don't want to create a class just to declare a message. I just want to be able to do it very quickly. I wrote a Visual Studio extension where if I want to declare a message, I just, let me go to my mediation. Oh, why isn't this working? I could write it anywhere, but if I wanted to, I'm trying to find go back to my view model. If I wanted to just declare a message, instead of declaring a class like we do in Prism, oh, this is running. I could do it just like that. It's very quick, right? In case you missed it. Of course, this is done. This is a property, right? So this would be done inside of a class and not inside of a constructor or another method. But whenever I need to identify or declare various messages, I just type in a message snippet and then type in whatever name of that message. And I do it like that. In regards to your question about strong typing, no, I'm not sure of the best way of doing that. But what I want to do is do things as quickly as possible. I haven't spent much time trying to figure out how to do both. This is an example of when a message gets published, and if we don't use a Lambda expression, which I don't because I'm not sure how to unsubscribe when using a Lambda. This is a method handler for a particular message where when a service gets selected, that message gets broadcasted, and this particular method gets fired off from one of the clients, or should I say observers. That's what a publish looks like. And so for publishers, or should I say, for clients or subscribers, they can, what I find myself doing is I subscribe to a response. Say I'm not in the constructor and I'm just in the method. Well, I can guarantee for the most part that that constructor is going to be called one time, right? So I don't really have to worry about memory leaks, I don't think. But for an arbitrary method, that method could be called n number of times. And so there's some functionality where I could say subscribe first time or first publication or whatever, and it guarantees that it's only going to subscribe once. And once a message gets broadcasted, that subscription is removed. Also, I find that when I'm subscribing or when I'm publishing, I first subscribe to a response to a message that I want to publish. And so my client will say publish request widget, right? And then on another object that subscribe to that message request widget, he'll receive that, he'll process that data with that payload called widget or something to that effect, and then if they want to, they can publish a response that my other client can subscribe to. And that's it. So
when you do your test, your unit test, you test all your events also?
yes. Well, I don't. That's okay. That message bus is thoroughly tested. The one that I wrote, and any message bus I would hope that you pull down that's reputable. It's been already tested. It's thoroughly tested, which means that time may be better spent focusing on the code that you write. But when leveraging that, because my unit tests are completely different from the application, and I find myself writing subscriptions, right? So that when I have to write subscriptions within my unit test, or else if there's no subscribers within my business logic, the tests are going to fail. So my unit test within setup is going to subscribe to various messages, and I'll just pass true or do whatever I need to do in order for that specific test to pass.
I ask because, I mean, it sounds like that's what you're doing. So if there is, you're expecting for a widget, and instead of a widget, you get a screw. So, I mean, your unit test is going to catch that. Follow me?
Yeah, well, yeah, my unit test is going to catch anything that doesn't have an expected result.
Right. But the point is that you wouldn't know it at compile time. You have to, that's the whole point of strong typing versus weak typing.
Well, okay, I have no argument about that, right? Completely agree. My unit tests are going to identify everything that's wrong with my code, and a good percentage of the time, there's times where, well, for the very first time, there's times where I realized that my test failed because I had no subscriber for a message that was published within my business logic. And I have to update that test, and there's other tests that also have that subscription missing, so I'll do that as well.
Looks like you're using MS Test, right?
Yeah.
What framework are you using?
I just wrote I'll create a test API, and that looks like this up here. I think I can expand. No, I can't. There's a. Let me go back. Yeah, so I create a test API, and I create various objects that I just reuse over and over again throughout my unit tests. So, for example, I have a service that I use a lot that's already defined. Same thing with materials. And that's what I use for unit test support. So I just write out that infrastructure with predefined objects I use over and over again. Any other questions? All right, so my question, which I think I know from this group, right? It's probably all groups, is in regards to this notion of user story modules. Is it more work than what it's worth? Is it something that we can build on that shows some potential? Or is it, no, the way we build software, there's no issues with maintaining existing architecture?
Well, you're using search and replace to look for, you're using find
Yeah,
to look for half the things in your project that you said is everything is so easy to find in the first place.
Well, okay. So if I do mock, I'm in the same file. Well, no, I'm not. To your point, yes.
So I know what you're trying to solve.
Okay.
But I think this code goes too far.
Okay.
And that's I'm trying to be critical. I'm just expressing my opinion. There are ways to achieve what you want to solve without going to this extreme. Because this is presenting a whole bunch of other issues. And as the project grows, it's going to make it even worse than what you were originally trying to solve. So I think it's over.
Okay. So some of the issues are performance. One of you guys said, "Oh, hold up, there's some duplication there, right?" That stuff always happens. It gets consolidated, right? What are some other issues?
Well, isn't your deployment more complicated also? You have more DLLs to worry about.
That can be mismatched possibly.
Version.
You've got separate references for all those projects, so if one DLL or something you have to link to or reference to, now you have to go through all those different projects and make sure they all have the exact same version. And what if you're updating a package or something like that, and you forget one of those projects, you forget to update that one or miss it. Now things are blowing up, they're out of sync. Trying to track that down.
Yeah. Also, you're naming all of your U model, and I know you have different namespaces, but try to consolidate that code later. You have 20 U model classes under different namespaces. Right. Still, there's some issues there. Right.
I see the same thing. I like the concept and where you're going and the whole issue of organizing your projects so that they make sense and they're readable and you can look at them and know what they do. But I also think that would be going too far to have one separate project. But I think conceptually, the question is what is too far. I'm sure that we all have some area in the middle as to what is our comfort zone. And a lot of times when I'm organizing things, I'll go through reorganizing projects. It might make sense to have things organized by function, and then later there might be certain parts of it that might be organized by services. And just when I think I've got things organized, in the perfect way where it makes sense, a different idea comes up, and I see that becoming more work, in terms of everyone being a separate project. That there would be extra work there, but again, conceptually, I like the concept. Whether I would do everything as a separate project, I wouldn't go to that extreme, but a lot of times you're separating out common functionality into projects. So you might have groups of projects that have, organization within it. So conceptually, I like the concept. I just wouldn't take it to to the same length that you are.
And I think it really varies. Oh, go ahead. If you look at it from a class standpoint, instead of a DLL standpoint, it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, so basically,
Right, granularity.
it differs on a per problem basis too, because sometimes we do need more granular projects to solve very specific problems, or maybe we're gonna be mixing and matching those components with other projects, and so in that case, getting more granular makes sense. Other times, the problem domain is by definition very intertwined and interrelated, and so having a more monolithic one big project that solves this problem with some outermost APIs to share with other projects, sometimes that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It all really depends on the problem domain.
And this is something I hadn't considered.
Yeah, it's out of the box. It's good. I like the
Well, no,
direction
it's
you were
Robert
going.
Martin.
I think it probably.
I just experimented with his
Oh.
what he was preaching.
Yeah, for my taste, I think it went too far, but I mean, it's out of the box thinking. Sometimes when we go out of the box, we go too far, and sometimes we don't. But it's good you went out of the box. I think that's pretty neat.
But I think with a lot of methodologies in terms of how things are organized,
Yeah.
I can't think of the name of it right now, but like in another company I was working at, you can have any functions that were larger than,
10 lines.
10 lines of code, right?
No,
Conceptually, it makes sense, but
yeah,
it becomes,
it's a nightmare.
when you start looking at the code, they're kind of pulled back a little bit to get the happy medium.
Yeah.
But, you can see the reasoning behind it.
It's funny you mentioned that, because one of the projects that I had worked on one time, a long time ago, that was probably the most difficult project to maintain. It was actually probably the best architected project I had ever worked on, because it was so granular. They had rules like that, like no function could be more than 10 lines, and you couldn't have more than 5 functions and 5 properties. And so what do you end up doing? You end up having things that belong together all spread out because of these nonsense rules. And they actually just literally went through developers, because a lot of people just couldn't figure out. The code was so complicated because there were so many layers to it. It was just too granular to be understandable.
So
I mean, well, think about it. If you had a limit of 5 lines of code per class, I mean, we could pick an arbitrary. Think of how your code would look. I mean, it would be a monstrosity. It would be unintelligible, undebuggable, everything. So you can go too far.
Right.
So we have to, we shouldn't have rules. We need guidelines. And it depends on the nature of the project as to what those should be.
So as I went over this, I think that this approach is really the inverse of what almost all of us are doing right now. I think all of us are, we start off and I won't say all of us. I think it's easy for most of us to start off and just build, and then we end up with a monolith, right? We have what? We have a model DLL, right? We may have a repository DLL. We may have a client, right? Sometimes we just have 2 DLLs, right? And we just immediately start writing off where everything is consolidated. And then we get together and we say, we need to break this up. And then we start breaking it up, right? I think this is at the other extreme, where we have all these flyweights. We're so granular, and then we start having conversations about, okay, how can we start consolidating this? And I'm not sure if that's bad, right? I think it's easier to consolidate than it is to break up. That's what I think. All right.
We both have challenges, because sometimes when you made it as granular as what we have here, sometimes you have functions that are similar but still different in 2 of those places, and now you're trying to merge those 2. I mean, they have complications either way, I guess.
All right, well, that's it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for the feedback.
Thanks everybody. This is a great presentation. Good stuff.
Well, thanks.
When you post it on your blog, send us a link so we can have a link to the website.
Okay.
We have a couple slices of pizza left, and a lot more soda. Apparently I was a bit more efficient.
Just a suggestion.
Yes.
Some people just like plain old water instead of soda.
Yeah.
Maybe have some water as well.
That's good. Yeah, good idea. Well, if anyone else wants any soda to take any home, grab some. Otherwise, I'll put it in my car. We're also having Xamarin Dev Day.
Interesting approach.
This month.
You know what I'm
Everybody
thinking?
know
I
about
like
that?
the paradigm.
Cool.
You know, the
There's,
user story thing.
Xamarin
But
Dev
when I
Day,
think of it, I think more like what makes sense to me is, are you familiar with SPAs, single page applications in MVC? I think it would make a lot of sense for this. Each user story is a task the user begins, proceeds through, and completes, right? You could have each one of those be like a single unified view that accomplishes some story. And it's all encapsulated in that view, and then composed up behind the covers, with the view models and logic that you need. But
that's not how.
encapsulate
I don't really think
it
about
that way with.
That's not how siloed spas are built.
Well, sometimes those things go to the extreme, where it is seriously a single page application, and the entire website is one big MVC page with a bunch of JavaScript spooky stuff, just sending messages back and forth to update the page magically, with no actual refresh of any HTML. It's just JavaScript magic behind the scenes. But usually what I've heard recommended is you have a single page app for like one area or activity, but you don't try to make the entire website, all the different hundreds of pieces of functionality in one page. You try to keep it reined in a little bit to a single user activity. But I think something like that could make sense. And again, I think usually where things break down is the views have to be kind of specific per platform. Even with Xamarin.Forms, I know there are differences between the different UIs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay. Thanks for your presentation.
Thanks for the questions.
Good to see you, man.
Hey, yeah.
Where you been?
All
over?
different places.
Yeah.
Where you're at now? You're not at what was it?
No, I just started a new job up in Boca, a company called R Technologies. They're like point of sale systems and other related stuff.
Is that of Xamarin?
Yep. Yep.
The IBM?
Yeah, it's around there, Broken Sound, Congress.
Yeah.